That bread again. Wamos. Dogged in the dark. Your kid got asthma, and you're blaming someone else for it. This lady's like, oh, I'm sure that my kid has this severe asthma because this guy smoked a couple cigarettes around my kid, and that's why I hate him. Like, like, couldn't be that your kid was just going to be sick anyway. Like, cigarettes aren't magic like that. They're bad for you, but like, especially if you're talking about babysitting, like, come on. Yeah. Yeah. Judgment for the plaintiff. Like it has an email being like, "Oh, can we borrow this?" And it's like, "No, that was all a gift. He gave it to us as a gift." Terrible people. No! God damn it! Oh, such fail. Oh, god damn it. Mm. This dude's hilarious. Like I didn't know. I just, I just with the stuff. Oh! Huh. my phone ringing? Oh. Calling me about trucking opportunities or whatever. They're calling me because they have the openings for Class A drivers. CDL something. I don't either. You should be regurgitating gender stereotypes for the camera. Oh! No! Uh, Okay. Oh wait. What my EPUF? EPUF. Where did I leave you? This is the White family. Like their last name should be White. I mean, look at his hair. He looks like a sitcom star. Adorable. Easy on my duck. Duck, 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 duck. You quib the ground. You are the dustable.
thing as a liberal media bias, 4 times as many Democrats, which only puts it at 28% for Democrats, the others being, quote, independent, which is
Right.
another word for I am a
Wait.
Democrat, but I don't wish to admit it to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the bottom line, the only thing that you wish that you should take away from the study is that 7% of journalists are Republicans, but then when you tell the faux liberals that there might be some bias in the media, they say that's outrageous. Only a Breitbart Nazi would say something like that.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 points to make. Nowadays, if you are not a liberal, you're a rebel. I mean, it should be a badge of honor now. It should be the way Abbie Hoffman was
Right.
in the early 70s. You know, if you're a conservative on campus, you should be viewed as like the new Abbie Hoffman. I used to say that Breitbart was like that for me. But these studies have been around. There was a study I remember that they looked at voting records, and it was like 90 some odd percent voted Democrat. And there was just there's no uniformity like this in any other profession. Like even in bankers, like if you look at bankers,
academia,
Democrats.
Academia has roughly the same ratios. So, for example, there's a study. Sorry to interrupt you, but there's a study that looked at political affiliations of professors at a bunch of universities. I often quote the study, and across disciplines, it was 5-1 Democrats, which is bad enough. But now, in all the social activism field, in all the touchy-feely fields, sociology and humanities and so on, sociology, it was 44-1, the ratio. So, I mean, again, now, by the way, when I tell people these types of statistics, the typical response from them, which is frankly laughable and grotesque, is that, well, of course journalists and professors are going to be Democrats because they are smart and educated, right? So the only possibility, you having a different foreign policy perspective or a different fiscal policy perspective, which are not clear black and white issues, that is simply because you're an idiot. And so they just reaffirm their echo chambers, and it's an impenetrable echo chamber.
Yeah. And that's why they completely missed this election. Like I would say in my circle of friends, I think I said this on the 5, a third were voting Trump, a third was not going to vote for Trump. It could be Gary Johnson. A third might go Hillary. And then I would say another third, but that would be 4/3. So a third, within the third of not Trump, probably not voting maybe. But because of that, I knew it was going to be close. And I knew that there's a possibility Trump would win. But if you talk to people that were like at the New York Times, they assumed it was going to be a blowout because they didn't know one single person that was for Trump. My sister and her husband have had friends they live in California, have friends that are very liberal. They treat them like anomalies, like your devil unicorn. They were so like everything's going to be, Hillary's going to win big. So they treated them, they patronized them. When Trump won, the Facebook pages became so bitter and so angry. And the people that were for Trump, like my sister and her husband, weren't allowed to say anything.
Right.
They couldn't gloat because that would be wrong if they gloated. However, if Hillary had won, it would have been perfectly okay for them to parade it around and put hearts on their Facebook pages and historical firsts and show the shattered glass ceiling, so they lose. That side loses, and they are beyond themselves. And they're actually arguing and saying blaming people, like it's because of you the country's going to hell. And it's like, what happened? What happened to the greater good? What happened to the heart's in the right place? What happened to you people? Like, this is the democratic system.
Well, I think so. I'm going to analogize what happened in terms of the echo chamber with something that happens with professors. So oftentimes when professors receive their teaching evaluations at the end of the semester, they're surprised that they didn't do as well as they did. And the reason for that is related to overconfidence that stems from this very, I hope you'll agree, insightful observation. Only the students who thought you were great come up to you in your office and say, hey, Professor Saad, I really loved your course. I think it was great. And so my brain only codes the 7 students who came up to me and thought I was great. But any other student who thought that I was the devil unicorn, didn't
Yeah.
knock on my door and say, you know what, Professor Sad, you really suck. And therefore,
Yeah.
I think that everybody loves me, but then I receive my teaching evaluations and I realize that there is a multiplicity of opinions about my performance. Well, this is exactly what happened in this election, right? Everybody that all this castrated class speak to, Hillary Clinton is wonderful and we're going to have this collective orgasm when she wins, and only some hicks that we never interact with could possibly want the devil to win. And then they're shocked, right? Because they never code that possibility.
Yeah, and I mean, even it was surprised. I just thought it was going to be close, but I thought she was gonna squeak by.
So
I thought he was going to win popular vote, and she was going to win the electoral college. I'm not even sure what the popular vote is now, but I think I got it off. I mean, he won the electoral, and she was winning the popular vote. I don't know if he actually overtook her. I don't know if he did. I should look that up, given that I go on TV and talk politics.
So let's go back to. I know that you have to leave by 11, so I'm being very careful with the time. Let's go back to campuses and discuss some recent cases. Maybe you've heard of them. If not, I'll briefly summarize them and then we go on. So there are a couple of cases that have recently come up where professors, and of course I include myself in this packet, are fighting back against political correctness. Luckily for me, there haven't been any repercussions. But other professors have been suffering quite gravely. So there's a couple of cases. I'll mention a few cases. So Jordan Peterson, I don't know if you know this case. Are you familiar with it?
No, but I'm sure I've read it, but I don't know the name.
Okay, and then there's another one actually in your neck of the wood. Michael, what is his name? Rechtenwald from NYU. So I thought I would mention both of them. So Jordan Peterson is a guy who's actually been on my show. He reached out to me and came on my show about a month ago. He's a University of Toronto professor of psychology who basically decided that he was going to voice an opinion, thinking that Canada was a democratic country where freedom of speech is allowed. What an idiot for having thought that. He decided that he was going to weigh in as a professor, as an academic, as a citizen, against a tabled bill called Bill C-16, whereby they were incorporating gender expression and gender identity as separable group that are amenable to hate crime, right? And he was demonstrating that the manner in which, never mind whether those groups should be included or not, he was arguing that the language of the bill was so vague, right? If you do something or don't do something, if you say something or don't say something, if it's intentional or unintentional, you could be held, accountable. And so then he was called by the University of Toronto, and really an Orwellian move where they're saying, look, you have to stop saying this. And now he might potentially end up losing his job. He's a tenured professor who's very, very accomplished. So that's one. And I'll mention the other one very quickly, and then I'll ask you to weigh in. And these certainly would be guys that would be great to come on your show. Not that I wish to serve as their publicist. Because before they come, I think we both know who should be on your show on a regular basis.
We proved that point.
Michael Rechtenwald is a guy at NYU who was speaking out against the safe spaces and the microaggressions and the trigger warnings and so on. And then NYU came after him hard. Now, I don't know exactly what caused them to turn the tide, and now I think they've given him a raise, maybe because of public outcry. So, you've got Brexit, then you've got Donald Trump, then you've got this guy being overturned. Are we smelling a shift in the winds, sir?
I think so, and I go back to that when I was at Hofstra, and I was just struck by I've never seen students vocal about anything that wasn't left wing. Like, it's always left wing. So I thought, my God, maybe this is happening. And I know, and I've been invited to speak at colleges, and when I do my book signings, there's a lot of kids out there, and they're like not. I think part of it is humor. That they now are. I think humor is the best way to deal with this stuff, and I think they it's like, why are we taking these people seriously? And I think that's the first step. No longer take them seriously. I do think that parents, the one flaw in this, parents aren't keeping up on these schools. Like, they're not doing the investigative work. Like, what's happening on this campus? Do I want to send my kid to a brainwashing cult? Because that's what it is. And it's like, Imagine you have a kid who leaves high school, straight A student, really smart, wants to do, and all of a sudden he gets involved in these soft sciences that have no future. Whether it's, I don't know, whatever studies you can like it's like
Women,
what it does.
women, but not spelled MEN. It's MYN, right?
Right. Well, I think correct spelling is a patriarchal construct.
Very true.
Why should you tell me what is the correct spelling of the word when a man probably wrote that dictionary?
Well, by the way,
I feel the same way about math.
That's why it's just wrong to correct somebody, and it's racist if they're speaking in the dialect of Ebonics, right? Because you are saying that their manner of speaking is grammatically correct. That's racist.
Isn't there a movement against math? I remember reading something about people saying, activists on campus saying that like the absolutes of math are patriarchal, and sexist. Like math is inherently sexist.
Right. So
which is actually sexist against women when you say that. So you're saying it's sexist against women. They're basically saying that women can't handle math because it's absolute.
Well, Lawrence,
have you seen this?
Yes, I have. So it's. I mean, I think I'll speak about the specific instance you're talking about, but I'll give you sort of the background of that kind of, inane stupidity. I think you're talking about Science Must Fall, and it was a bunch of social activists at University of Cape Town who were, very, very, post-apartheid. Science is a Western way of thinking, and so on. And you have to decolonize your mind. Right?
Yes.
Now, that idiocy actually stems from one of the, quote, intellectual movements that has infected Western universities, postmodernism, right? So postmodernism is rightly referred to as an anti-science movement because it takes the central foundation of what science is, which is there are regular patterns in nature that we try to humbly, with humility, understand as scientists as best as we can. And they say, no, that's a completely wasted effort because everything is subjective. Everybody has their own way of knowing. There is no privileged way of knowing as per the scientific method. So stop this, you racist Nazi. So that's what started all this. And for 40 years, you've been inoculating at UC Berkeley and other schools kids with postmodernism. And then you end up with the science must fall. But the same people who say science must fall take a plane that is based on principles of aerodynamics to their conference to spew the bullshit that science must fall. And that irony, they miss it.
Yeah, it's amazing. But again, I go back to, there has to be an alternative to this. If campuses aren't going to change, then there has to be can't there be a parallel universe of campuses where you go, okay, you're not going to have any of this deconstruction bullshit. You're not going to have any of this postmodern crap. You're actually going to learn the humanities. You're going to learn a trade. I mean, that's what Peter Thiel and people should be thinking about. Like, what's the alternative? I know he says don't go to college. Well, I think I remember he was going to pay $100,000 to students not to go to school, which is actually a pretty cool thing. I would have taken that, definitely. I probably would have ended up drunk somewhere, like on an island, and you never would have heard from me again. It wouldn't have worked for me. I needed discipline. But I think that there has to be at some point another path because they're now indoctrinating students into a useless future. Like, what are they going to do? You're no longer a productive member of society if all you do is file grievances.
Well, the bottom line is, education is, of course, to learn something in terms of the knowledge base. You have to learn, if you're taking differential equations in a math program, you have to learn what differential equations is. But more generally, you just have to learn how to critically think, right? So independently of whether you use the humanities to achieve that goal or neurobiology, the idea is that there is a framework for reason, whether we call it the scientific method or use logic or use some other mechanism. You're teaching people how to critically think, irrespective of the discipline that they're in. So to speak to your point, any discipline that is an affront to reason and science is anti-intellectual, is fraudulent, and should be kicked out of the campuses.
Yeah. Here's a funny story. When I was at Berkeley, I learned that I had to play the game, which was deconstruction.
Oh, yes.
So it didn't matter what the author's intent was. You can apply a different intent. and I had my thesis was on Herman Melville. And so I did it. I went into the library and I looked up and I found all this stuff on like the homoerotic themes of Herman Melville. So I wrote my thesis on that. It was like it should have gotten an A, but somehow I had the only professor who wouldn't buy that bullshit. He was an old school humanities professor. He looked like a sailor, and so I get my paper back expecting to sail through, and I think I got like a C minus. And I'm looking down, and all he's writing in the margin is, "You got to be kidding me! Come on!"
I like this guy. I'd like to bring him on the show. Is he still alive?
He must have been okay. He was talking 83. He was probably in his 60s, so I don't think he's around.
Okay.
But I always think about that. I was thinking about I should Google this dude because he saw right through me. He saw, maybe he didn't know I was playing a game, and he just thought that I believed it. But he was just like, "You're completely nuts."
You know,
and it was right because I wasn't using my mind. I wasn't.
There's a professor who I think is retired now, and I tried to reach out to him, but he's Professor Emeritus. He's also in his 80s. His name escapes me right now, but he's a professor of philosophy at Princeton who wrote a book, which if you haven't read, you need to go and buy it after we get off. It's called, and this is a very highbrow guy, it's called On Bullshit, where he does a philosophical analysis of bullshit in the grand sense, all sorts of sort of cancerous, fraudulent movements and ideas. And I just thought, what a brilliant title. So anyways, check him out. Are there any things that before we wrap up, any things that not that you need my small platform to promote your ideas, you sort of operate in a bigger platform, but can I offer you this small platform to promote anything that you're currently working on that's not yet public?
I would just push everybody to try to watch my show, which is on Fox. It's doing great. It's on at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on Fox News. And there's my wife. Come here. Say hello, Elena.
Oh.
It's Elena. There she is.
I can't see her. Hi there. Hi there. You got yourself
You're in Quebec, right?
I'm sorry?
You're in Quebec, right?
I am in La Belle Province, Montreal, Quebec. Come up and see us.
Yeah, we've always wanted to go, but some things kept me out of Canada. We won't get into that. But anyway, yeah. But I think the show's doing good. I'm gonna probably start writing another book, but I haven't figured out. I keep writing proposals. I don't know if you've done this. You write a proposal, and then you're done. It's like, okay, that's out of my system.
Right.
I don't want to write the book. I wrote the proposal, and then my agent will go, okay, when you get it started, I go, I have another idea because I want to write. I actually want to write about artificial intelligence, but I don't think I'm equipped to. I don't think I have the mathematical science background to do it. But I've read Bostrom's book. I keep picking up books on this, and I keep going because politics is exhausting after a while, and you make so many enemies amongst friends. I thought, do something totally different, and get out of that. But I realized maybe I'm just not I'm not equipped for hard thoughts. I'll just stick to politics.
Well, listen, based on the Spitfire speed at which you carry your show, I think you're definitely not lacking IQ, sir. So I think keep up the great work, and it was an absolute pleasure having you
You're
on.
in New York, you got to come do the show.
Please, thank you so
we
much.
usually take on Fridays and Saturdays, so it's a lot of fun.
It'll be an honor. Thank you so much. Stay on the line. Guys, check out Greg's work on Fox. Talk to you soon.
Shoot. Put that one on. Okay. I'm back.
Hey, what's up, everybody? All right, I want to get you up to speed on a couple things and, of course, talk about the election and who I have on the show this week. First off, real quick, as you probably know at this point, we are building out our home studio. So I've got the contractors and the builders are inside there whacking away at stuff. And, of course, I decided to do this outside. Now there's a guy next door doing construction. Anyway, bear with us. They're telling us that this whole build should take like 2-3 weeks. You never know with contractors. So in the meantime, we're going to be doing Google Hangouts with people. And my guest today is University of Toronto psychology professor, Jordan Peterson, who is in a whole brouhaha, has a whole kerfluffle, there's a good word for you, going on about free speech right now and his use or non-use of preferred gender pronouns. So we're going to get into that. I'm looking forward to talking to him. And literally hundreds of you have asked me to have him on over the last couple weeks. So that's very cool. You guys act as my bookers as well. All right, so I just want to share a couple thoughts quickly. This is my direct message for the week. We're doing this totally unscripted this time, while I don't have a teleprompter for me. Couple thoughts on the election. So look, I was saying to everybody, and you can listen to my chat, I did a 3.5-hour chat last Monday with Joe Rogan the day before the election. I was saying I thought this was 50-50 the whole time, because I thought the Trump base was enthused. I thought the Hillary base was not enthused, and if those people showed up, then that was what was going to happen. Now here's the deal. For those of you watching this who dig what I do, who have heard the message that I've been promoting for the last year and a half against this social justice nonsense and this collectivism over the individual and the oppression Olympics and all of this stuff, this is actually a win for us. Now let's set aside Trump for just a second. Our movement, right, the things that we have been talking about judging people individually, not by groups, and also just calling out the nonsense and bullshit of the mainstream media, and calling out the bullshit of the elites, and all of that stuff, and not ignoring the whole middle of the country. I'm somebody I'm from New York and I live in California now, but I don't ignore or belittle the people in the middle of the country, and I don't think anyone should. These are all the things that I've been talking about, and finding common ground and not using buzzwords like racist and bigot and homophobe and Islamophobe and all this stuff to just silence dissent. All of these things, this was a win for us, right? Because if you think about it, the elite, the media, everybody, the establishment all wanted one thing to happen. And what happened? The people actually used their voting power to stop that very thing from happening. That's actually beautiful. Now, if you hate Trump, let's see what happens. My feeling is at the moment, I think there's a great opportunity here. As Scott Adams said on my show, out of kind of chaos and craziness is when opportunity arises. I think everybody, and I bet you right now listening to this, feel like there's a great opportunity right now. I think there are people coming across on every side of the aisle right now, looking around and reevaluating everything. Going, who can I work with? Who are my allies? Who are my friends? What kind of place do I want to live in? Do I want to suppress free speech or not? What do I want to do? I think there's opportunity here. And I think Trump as a populist, in a weird way, his narcissism and populism might work to our advantage. He's not an ideologue. He's not like Mike Pence, for example, who, as a Christian conservative, he believes certain things about gay marriage or about abortion because of an ideology. Trump, I think, is a populist. He wants to basically do probably things that will make him feel popular and loved. There might be a way that some good stuff could come out of that. Maybe he'll do some infrastructure stuff, lower some taxes. There's no reason to think he's going to go all in on foreign adventurous wars and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's opportunity here. We still have 2 or 3 months, basically, of Obama. I think these people protesting, look, you have the right to protest. Of course, I am for free speech and for expression. I don't know that you will ever find anyone that is more for that than me. So these people have a right to do it, but you have to do it legally. If you block roads, like the 101, which leads to my house, if you block roads, all you're doing is actually strengthening the other side. Nobody's joining your cause when you do illegal things or burn cop cars or vandalize things or beat people or any of that stuff. You have to do it legally, and then you have a moral case to stand on. So I think a lot of these people protesting, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think they think they're fighting for the right things. They think they're fighting against fascism or against racism or something like that. But it's not actually what they're doing. They're helping the other side. So anyway, my feeling is there is great opportunity right now. I think that people kind of feel that, and if the economy gets going and Trump doesn't do some of the more crazy things that people think he might, I think he's going to have to govern really from the center, and I think that will be really good for classical liberals, basic liberal people. I think it'll be really good for mainstream conservatives, and then maybe the people that are on the fringes of all of this thing will so slowly be silenced. That's my suspicion at the moment, and maybe I have a slight sense of what I'm talking about because I kind of saw this whole thing unfolding the way it did. By the way, I'll just say one other thing. We do this show. You guys fund us on Patreon, which is amazing. About 3,000 of you, and I've been doing my Google Hangouts with you, where I do group chats and I do one-on-one chats with a whole bunch of different people. And for about the 80 or so people that I've talked to in the last couple of days, there's a genuine feeling of most of the people did not vote for Trump and certainly did not support Trump, but that maybe there's some opportunity here. So let's see what happens. Let's see. Let's not prejudge. Let's not be prejudiced. Let's judge as things happen. If Trump does something wrong, does something illegal, immoral, any of that, I will be the first to hold his feet to the fire. I hope we can get Trump on the show. I hope we can get Clinton on the show. I'll talk to any of their kids, any of that stuff. So there's something happening here. I am so sure that we're like right in the thick of it, and I'm excited. I'm actually excited. So I know a lot of people are fearful right now. I'm excited for what the future can bring. I'd love to know your thoughts, so let us know in the comments right down below. And as I said, a couple Google Hangouts over the next few weeks, and then we're back in studio, and we're going to be doing more shows than ever. We have no time limits on how long I can sit down with people. We've got a couple new spin-off ideas and some other segments and some really cool stuff, and more live streaming and all that good stuff. So thank you guys for your support, and let's see, can we make America great again without sacrificing what's been good already? Let's find out. As you guys know, we are building out our home studios. So we are in a makeshift studio at the moment. We are going to be doing a Google Hangout for the first time. Normally when we do remote, we do Skypes, but our Skype portion of the studio and our main studio is all being built out. Should be good to go in a couple weeks, but I did not want to starve you fine people of content, especially in these crazy times that we live in. So this week, I'm very excited to be talking to Jordan Peterson. He is a University of Toronto psychology professor. He has really been in the thick of this free speech thing. And pretty much, I would say about 700 of you roughly requested for him to be on the show and for us to sit down. I've read a lot about him lately. And Jordan, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thanks very much.
So thank you for being our Google Hangout guinea pig and bearing with us as we are in between studios. This is a pure free speech zone. That probably makes the guy like you feel pretty good.
Yeah, well, good. That means we might be able to discuss some things that are important instead of pussyfooting around.
Absolutely. So let's get right to it. So for people that don't know your story, what has sort of put you in the news over the last couple of months, it's actually quite astounding because you're in Canada, which is a place that has a strong tradition of free speech. So for people that have no idea what's going on with you, can you just lay out the basics of what's transpired over the last couple of months?
Yeah, well, there's some new legislation that's pending at the federal level called Bill C-16, and Bill C-16 adds gender identity and gender expression to the list of protected categories under the Canadian Human Rights Code, Canadian Human Rights Act, and also adds transgressions against those categories, people who are in those categories, to the hate speech provisions of the criminal code. So it's very, very punitive legislation. And that in itself is somewhat appalling, although it's not obvious why. But there's similar legislation already in many provinces in Canada, which is equivalent to the state level. And there's a requirement that originated in Ontario for people to use what are called preferred pronouns to address someone. And as far as I can tell, by reading over the legislation, failure to use someone's preferred pronouns is now a hate crime in Canada.
Right.
And,
so let's just pause there for a second.
Yeah,
I want,
right.
I want people to really understand what that means. That means that if you potentially accidentally refer to someone as the wrong pronoun, you may not realize if someone happens to be a male or a female, you could potentially be in legal trouble. Now that also you could do it intentionally, which I think under free speech would be fine as well. But even accidentally, we're going down a pretty slippery slope here.
Well, in the legislation, like there are legal moves afoot in many organizations at a policy level or a legal level to also alter the way that the law is interpreted, so that instead of judging someone on the intent of their speech, you judge them on the consequences of their speech. Mm-hmm. And also and this is particularly true, say, with sexual harassment policies, to remove, and this is happening mostly at universities right now, although it'll happen in other organizations soon enough, to remove, if you're accused of sexual harassment or worse, instead of you presumed innocent until proven guilty, they use the doctrine of preponderance of evidence. And so not only are there changes afoot to regulate the way that people speak, they call that compelled speech. The American Supreme Court ruled on that at one point and ruled it unconstitutional, that it contradicted the First Amendment, that compelled speech. So, but in Canada, I think these pieces of legislation are also unconstitutional, but of course no one's yet challenged them, as far as you'd have to challenge them to prove that, which would be all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. Okay. So we're obviously going to focus mostly on the free speech component of it, but
Yeah.
I would imagine that there's probably a few people listening to this that would say, wait a minute, maybe this guy just doesn't like transgender people. Maybe he just wants to be offensive to transgender people. So I'll just kick that back to you. Is that the case at all?
Well, a lot of the people who've been pushing this legislation claim to be speaking for the transgendered community, but that's not self-evident to me at all. I've received many letters of support from transgendered people, and actually just did a conversation with a transgendered woman in Vancouver. Most transgendered people, especially the classic type, I would say, speaking psychologically, are people who've had a difficult time adjusting to their biological sex identity since they were young, and some of them undergo fairly radical transformations in an attempt to become the other sex. And they have no problem with pronouns, they just want to be the other one.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. So they don't have any problem with he or she. In fact, they undergo a tremendous amount of trouble, I would say, to transform themselves, for better or worse, into a member of the opposite sex. The people who are pushing this legislation forward claim to speak for the transgendered community, but you can claim to speak for any community you want. That doesn't make you a legitimate representative.
Right. So that's a great point. And actually, the girl that you spoke to up in Vancouver, we've had on our Rubin Report fan show, so people can check that out. Her name is Darren Meyer. I think she's an excellent spokesperson for the trans community. I don't know that she's asking to be a spokesman for the trans community, but sometimes people are sort of just thrust into things. Okay, so in and of itself, you have no problem with trans people, right? Is that fair to say?
Well, I don't have any problem with trans people. I mean, I'm a clinical psychologist. I've dealt with every variety of person you could possibly imagine, and a fair number of people that you couldn't possibly imagine. And I'm quite comfortable with people who don't fit normally into normal categories. And I know how to deal with people who are in that situation very well. So the idea that I'm doing this because I'm somehow made nervous by people who don't fit neatly into gender categories it's exactly the sort of trick that you'd expect people on the radical left to pull, because it's what they do all the time. They called me a racist too, because the University of Toronto Human Resources and Equity Department has been taking advice from a group called the Black Liberation Collective, which was formulated by two women. One who is a self-avowed black suprematist who believes that white people are inferior because they don't have enough melanin in their skin, and that makes them unable to receive cosmic energy and transform it into proper thought. And
is that what my problem is?
That is definitely your problem. And the other one is under investigation for embezzling $300,000 from the University of Toronto Students' Union. And they also will not disavow violence in their pursuit of social transformation. The University of Toronto HR and Equity Department is taking policy advice from them, which I think is appalling. And because I've objected to that, I've been tarred with the epithet of racist. So, but it's typical. It's typical of this kind of mob behavior that the PC authoritarians like to engage in whenever anybody ruffles their feathers.
Yeah, I'm curious, were you keenly aware of that authoritarianism before you were subjected to it? I mean, I suspect at the academic level, you've seen a lot of this building, and I've seen some of your subsequent tweets over the last couple of months that you sort of had an idea about this. But did you really know exactly how bad it was until you were the target of their aim?
I probably knew. I mean, I've been disturbed about political correctness for a very long time. I've studied the development of totalitarian and authoritarian systems for about 4 decades, and I've been keeping a close eye on political correctness since the early 1990s, because it spiked when I used to teach at Harvard. I taught there from 93 to 98. Mm-hmm. It spiked. There was quite a spike in political correctness in the early part of the 1990s, but it kind of settled down. And so I thought it had gone back underground to where it was spawned, but it made its comeback quite dramatically in the last 5 years. And I've seen a lot of very ominous things occurring, a lot of them on American campuses. I mean, the episode at Yale with the Halloween costumes, for example, and the fact that one of the faculty members involved in that actually resigned was one of the more egregious examples, but certainly not the only one. So I made a couple of YouTube videos complaining about the Bill C-16 and also about the University of Toronto's decision to make anti-racism and anti-bias training so-called mandatory for its staff, which I thought was an appalling invasion of their employees' political freedom, and still do believe that. And also know that mandatory anti-racism and anti-bias training has it's not validated as a procedure, an educational or psychological procedure to reduce racism and bias. The evidence, in fact, suggests that it has the opposite effect. And then I also found at the University of Toronto, I got their training material once they started their mandatory training programs, and they're actually pushing, they define equity. It's HR and equity, human resources and equity. And this is coming your way, just so everyone knows it. The question is, what is equity? Because that's a different word than equality. Well, they defined equity in their training material. It's equality of outcome. Now you got to think about that.
Right, this is
I'm not kidding.
dangerous stuff, right?
It's unbelievably dangerous, and it's so pernicious because here's the hypothesis. Imagine you have an organizational pyramid, right? And there's layers of power, and then each layer of power has a demographic. It has a demographic element, right? I mean, there are men and women and people of different races and so forth. So you can segregate and analyze each strata by its demography. Well, and the hypothesis is you do that, then you compare it to the general population. And if there isn't a one-to-one match, then the organization is oppressive and corrupt and needs to be retooled. And this is what the University of Toronto administration is forcing its staff to learn. And
Okay. So when people feel this, when people say this, and it sounds absurd to feel like you can't force an equality of outcome, if anything,
you can. You just have to force things a hell of a lot harder than anyone wants to foresee.
Right. So I guess technically you can force it, but I think maybe I meant morally or ethically you shouldn't force it. How about that?
Well, what happens is everybody ends up sitting in the rubble, and they're all equal in outcome. So, and everyone's equal in outcome if enough people are dead. So, and I mean, those sound like dramatic phrases, but I know exactly what equality of outcome theory did to places like the Soviet Union and to Maoist China. It was absolutely and unbelievably disastrous and murderous.
So
I can't believe they're pushing this on us now.
Can you explain how we get there? How do you get there from this academic level that we're dealing with it to, regimes like that?
Well, you get there when see, people think these are academic issues, but what they fail to realize is that what happens on university campuses happens everywhere 5 years later. Like, the people who run things are trained in universities, and so however they're trained, that's how things are going to be run. Equality of outcome means that force has to be applied to make sure that every institution at every level falls into compliance with the equality doctrine. And you do that by retooling organizations and putting quotas on people, for example, or firing people, or whatever you have to do. So, for example, 65% of the medical faculty at the University of Toronto is women. So by the equality of outcome doctrine, well, what do? Do you fire 15% and replace them with men? Well, and I mean, in engineering, of course, the preponderance of people are male.
Oh.
But the pernicious idea is that that's a marker of oppression. And equality of outcome, well, it's worse than a Marxist doctrine. It's the most pernicious of Marxist doctrines. I mean, we fought a whole Cold War against that. We damn near put the whole world to the torch to ensure that philosophy didn't spread. And in Alberta, another Canadian province, the Alberta Teachers Association recently launched their LBGT, get that right, LGBT, thank you, education material, and they're trying to teach kids from grade 7 to grade 12 that there's no relationship between biology and gender, which is also written into this legislation, by the way, and I want to come back to that because that's a lot more important than people think. They seriously propose that children address each other as comrade.
So how much of this then is just a flaw in the West, that our academic systems have sort of rotted, which then leads up to our leaders rotting, and that no one is really fighting for the very principles that, as you said, we've fought wars over. I mean, millions of people have died over free expression and free ideas and battling back some of this Marxist stuff. And it seems to me that it's only now at the beginnings with stuff that you're doing and a few other people where it's starting to, people are realizing that actually free expression, free speech, free thought and equality of opportunity, not of outcome. These are actually cool ideas, but it seems like right now we're on the losing end of this stuff.
Well, it looks to me like we are. I mean, I tried to do so to get some sense of how this works, I would recommend that your readers go online and look up 12 websites. Look up women's studies websites. I don't care where you look them up because they're all the same. And I think exactly what they're up to. They believe that the West is a patriarchy, first of all, which is a word that's become so accepted now that people look at me in surprise when I object to its use. It's become so much part of the parlance. Well, of course it's a patriarchy. It's like, it's not so obvious that it's a patriarchy. And besides that, the idea that it's not only a patriarchy, but it's a corrupt patriarchy at every level, including the level of fundamental categorization, and that it needs to be retooled from the bottom up. And that what we do in our women's studies programs is we train people in that doctrine, and we teach them how to be political activists and infiltrating agents. And I'm not making this up. All you have to do is go onto the websites and read it. It's laid out there for everyone to see. And like the very idea that the West is a corrupt patriarchy is, well, that's retooled Marxism mixed with a bit of postmodernism. The postmodernists, especially Jacques Derrida, who I think is corrupt and dangerous beyond comprehension, virtually, driven by resentment and virtually nothing else, but very, very smart and very, very treacherous. He basically claimed that the only reason that human beings categorize to begin with is to exclude. And the thing is that it's very difficult doctrine to think through, because categories exclude. Mm-hmm. And they can be misused for purposes of exclusion, which is what unfair discrimination constitutes. And it's unfair when you deny someone a position that they're competent to occupy for reasons that have nothing to do with the issues at hand, right? That's the kind of discrimination that people should be objecting to. But the idea that categorization itself, the purpose of categorization is to exclude in a discriminatory fashion. It's an assault. It's truly an assault on reason itself, because we categorize. We're not that bright, human beings, and there's lots of world out there, and so we categorize the world to simplify it, so that we can act in it properly, and to equate the very act of categorization with discrimination is, well, that's what the postmodernists have done. And
right. It strikes me as incredibly dangerous. We categorize because you make value judgments on people's behavior, their thoughts, all of those things, and then we categorize them as good, bad, or indifferent, or whatever it may be. Better scholar, worse scholar, smarter, dumber, better athlete, whatever it is. Yep. If you didn't do that, then that sort of postmodern thinking would all just be one amorphous blob. But I guess that's sort of how they want us, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it isn't. I think it is an assault on the idea of value judgment per se, because that's become a pejorative. That's a value judgment. It's like, value judgments are what provide life with meaning, technically speaking, because your life has meaning when you're moving from a place that's not so good to a place that's better. That's what motivates you. Without value judgments, without the distinction between
this ball ain't never coming down.
Now, or between bad and better, or bad and good, there's no impetus to move forward. There's no motivation. There's no significance in life.
Right.
And I believe that there's an assault on that, because the problem with having significance in your life is that it requires responsibility. And one thing the SJW types, the PC authoritarians, don't want is any responsibility for anything whatsoever.
Yeah, so you would say that you should judge. That's actually your right and your duty as a person. You should not prejudge, correct? Like, so you should not be prejudiced, for example.
Well, you shouldn't judge speciously. Like,
right.
If I'm trying to hire someone to compose a piece of music to me, whether they're female or male or black or white or what sexual orientation they have, for that matter, is irrelevant to the production of the outcome. And so you shouldn't do it because it's counterproductive. It's not even in your interests to do it, much less not in the interests of the person that you're being prejudiced against.
So how do we untangle some of this stuff for all of the well-intentioned SJWs that I talk about all the time, that you talk about all the time, for all of the people that are enamored with the safe spaces and trigger warnings and that think that they're doing good. Because I do
I don't buy that. I don't believe the good intention idea.
Really, please
No,
take it away.
because like many terrible things have been done in history in the name of good intentions. And why should I assume that just because someone states they have good intentions, that their intentions are actually good? No, that's predicated on the idea that people are intrinsically good. And I don't buy that for a second. People are intrinsically good and evil. And you cannot take someone's intentions, especially their political intentions, especially if they have to do with changing others. You can't take that at face value. And I think that you can understand the politically correct types very well if you substitute resentment for the word compassion. Every time they use compassion, you substitute resentment, and you've got a pretty good sense of exactly what they're up to. And the idea that you're doing people a favor by making them safe it's the proposition that Sigmund Freud spent his whole life fighting against, because the classic Oedipal mother who devours her children like the witch in Hansel and Gretel, feeds them nothing but candy and fattens them up so she can eat them. That's a cautionary tale for our time, I'll tell you. Is those people say, well, I did it with the best intentions. All I was trying to do was protect my children. It's like children aren't there to protect. Children are there to encourage and toughen. And so the idea that this is good intentions, no way, man. I don't buy it for a second.
Yeah,
good intentions.
Yeah, I guess I would give a little caveat to what I said, which is that I think for the most part, the young people that are getting indoctrinated with this stuff, when they hear about it, I think their intentions are to do good. I think the leaders of a lot of these movements and the higher up academics and things like that, they really understand what's going on and realize how this is about power. No?
I don't buy it with the young people either. And the reason for that is, Carl Jung talked about the unholy alliance that an Oedipal mother formed with her child. So if your mother is very, very hyper-dependent, there's two things you can do about it. You can rebel against it, or you can take the offering. And the advantage to taking the offering, the alliance is basically, you never leave, and I'll never require that you do anything. Right. That's the mother with the hyper-dependent child. Okay, so how do you translate that into a political agenda? It's easy. I'm going to teach you a political ideology, and it'll put you in a position of moral superiority, and it will require absolutely no responsibility whatsoever on your part, and you'll be able to demonize and victimize people and have a place where you can vent your resentment and spleen. And so that's what's happening with the young people. And I mean, I don't want to be over categorical about it. I know that people get confused, but I don't think that there's any excuse for it. And I think that there's a corruption in the idea that what I should do as a political agent is change you, or even change the world. It's like, if you want to take and you want to say against the corruption of the world, then you should start by fighting against the corruption in your own heart. And that's a real battle. And that really requires responsibility. You should discipline yourself. You should get rid of your fear. You should expand your skills. You should stop being an uncarved block, and you should stop being pathetic. You should start being attractive to people of the opposite sex. You should sharpen yourself up. And you should have enough humility to know bloody well that when you're 18 years old, you don't know enough about the world to go out and radically reshape it. So they're being sold a bill of goods, there's no doubt about it. But the reason that it's so pernicious is because it appeals to the most hypocritical and deceitful and responsibility shedding element of young people. And of course, it's hard for young people to discipline themselves. And it's a long way up back into the middle class, So there's a real struggle that requires responsibility and courage to place yourself in the world as a productive citizen. It's a hell of a lot easier just to abandon that and complain about the entire structure of society.
Yeah, it's interesting. I didn't think we were going to go exactly in this direction with this, but you're really giving the best argument for liberty and for individualism over collectivism, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, this is it. This is absolutely individualism versus collectivism. And, I was interviewed by a young journalist today from Carleton University, and, she asked me straight out about my white privilege. And I thought, it's a question I find I find it appalling. It's an appalling question. She's a second-year political science student. She had no idea about the history of the Soviet Union. I asked her how many people were killed in internal repression in the Soviet Union, and you know, she had no idea. She had absolutely no idea. She guessed 1 million people, which meant she was out by a factor of about 50.
Right.
And she had never heard of the problem with the idea of collective group-based guilt. You know, and one of the processes by which the Marxist doctrine was transformed into the murderous outcomes in the Soviet Union was to play collective guilt games. The Soviets killed all their productive farmers in the late 1920s because they regarded them, anybody who owned a house, these were people who were serfs like 30 years before. Some of them had like clambered up the peasant ranks so that they maybe owned a brick house and could employ one person and had a cow and some, you know, and a field or two. But they were producing almost all of Russia's agricultural output. And it's because a small minority of people always produce the majority of whatever's being produced. So they threw them all on trains, shipped them up to Siberia, killed them all, collectivized the farms, and in the 1930s, 6 million Ukrainians starved to death. So this idea of collective guilt, and then the fact that someone could come right out and, you know, question me on my white privilege, if that isn't racism, I've never encountered racism in my life.
So what kind of backing or not backing, as I think I know the answer already, are you getting from your university? Because they've done some kind of shady stuff with you as well, right?
Yeah, well, after I released these videos, so the first video questioned Bill C-16 and similar provincial legislation, and I said in the video that making the video was now probably illegal. So we've come to the point where even questioning the damn legislation in Canada has become an illegal act. Then I made another video about the Human Resources Department's decision to make anti-racism and anti-bias training mandatory for their staff, and a third one about the PC game. And within a week, that initiated 2 demonstrations at the university campus. And the second one was a free speech rally, which I didn't organize but spoke at. And that was the one where the journalist Lauren Southern was assaulted by a professional activist and was seconded by another who immediately lied about what she had seen. That's become infamous on YouTube. The university sent me a warning letter on October 3rd. That was a week after I made the videos, accusing me of saying that they had received many letters from the university community stating that I was making an unsafe environment, and enumerated a variety of threats that had been put forth against trans people on social media, hypothetically, you know,
Right.
without, and so they warned me and told me to stop repeating my statement that I wouldn't use these gender-neutral pronouns. The reason they did that was because they reviewed the policies and concluded the same thing I concluded, which was that what I was doing was illegal. And you see, the legislation is written, and this is a real cute element of it. This is something really quite wonderful. If you're an employer in Ontario now, you are as responsible for your employees' acts of speaking as they are. And you're responsible for the consequences of their speech acts, whether they're intentional or unintentional, and whether or not a complaint has been made. So you're responsible for whatever your employees say, even if you don't know about it, even if no one complains, even if it was accidental.
Man, I mean, there's so much here. So wait, let's just pause for a second, because it warrants to mention that you are a tenured professor, which means that they can't fire you just for no reason. Is it even ever possible to fire a tenured professor? They'd have to.
Oh yeah, you can do it the way they're planning. They're planning at least to open that up as a possibility. The way you do that is the same way you discipline any employee. You send them a warning letter outlining what they're doing wrong and telling them to stop doing it. Oh, and when they wrote the first letter, they mischaracterized what I said quite badly, and I challenged them on that and told them that they should go and rewrite the letter and do it properly if they were going to come after me. But they refused my refusal, and so I kept the letter. And I got another letter on the 18th, and it was a real masterpiece of doublespeak, because they repeated their claims that they had received, many letters, which I'm sure they had from people within the university. But I knew at that point that they'd already also received at least 500 letters from people supporting me, because I was CC'd on the letters, as well as a petition that was signed by 10,000 people. They never even mentioned that. And they said that I had to stop. They told me I had to bring my behavior in line with university policy and stop repeating the claim that I wouldn't use gender-neutral pronouns. And one of the things that was really absurd about that is, so I was accused of violating university policy, but their own policy drafted in 1992, which is their policy on freedom of speech, states outright that at the university, freedom of speech is the highest value, and that professors not only have the right, but the obligation to engage in the criticism of the university and society at large. So it was hypocritical to the nth degree. And then even we're having a debate at 9:30 in the morning on Saturday. It's going to be live cast on my YouTube channel, Jordan Peterson Videos. The university, I proposed that the university hold a debate about these issues, and they actually agreed. Although they told me, and this really put my tail in a knot because I didn't know what to do about it. They told me that they'd go ahead with the debate, but that I couldn't repeat my insistence that I wouldn't use gender-neutral pronouns in the free speech debate. Right.
So wait. So let's just get this straight. They allowed you to go ahead and do this. Okay, that sounds good. But then the condition was that you actually could not repeat the very things that got this whole mess going in the first place.
Yeah. So I came home after that, and I wasn't sure what to do because I thought, well, first of all, it took me a while just to it was like being in a Delhi painting. It's so surreal. You know? I thought, oh, this is interesting. We're going to have a free speech debate with a restriction on free speech implicit in the debate. So I thought, well, I don't know what the hell to do about this. So I called a few theaters, and because I thought, well, to hell with it, I'll just do this by myself. But then, and I talked to my family. My parents were visiting, and I talked to my son and my wife. We talked about this a lot, and I wrote the university a letter, and I said, look, I'm not sure I can do this. This is absurd. Here's a better idea. You guys are making a mistake. You're supporting the wrong horse. You're backing the wrong horse. So why don't you do this instead? Why don't you come out in favor of my right to freedom of speech, regardless of whether you agree with me? Put your legal department behind protecting me, instead of threatening me essentially with the loss of my job, which is what they're fundamentally doing. And we'll fight this all the way to the Supreme Court. And so I went and talked to the dean who helped arrange the debate, and he said, there's no way the university will do that. And so I made another video saying all that and posted it online. I guess about 60,000 people watched that. But I decided to go ahead with the debate, and there were two reasons for that. One was, I know that it's very difficult for anything to happen without it being imperfect. And often the price you pay for moving ahead with something is to accept its imperfections, like the snake in the Garden of Eden, you know? There's always a snake in the damn garden, and so I thought this was the snake, and I thought, well, I thought it would be better to have the debate under university auspices than for me to go it alone, partly because the university should be hosting this debate, and partly because I also couldn't see, this was a secondary concern, but I also couldn't see any way out of the conundrum where I didn't lose. So if I refused the debate, then what would have happened was the university would have said, well, we offered in good faith and Peterson rejected it, and all the people that I would have hypothetically debate would have said, oh, well, he just had an excuse, and, you know, and he just took whatever excuse was open to him so that he didn't have to face us. So anyways, for better or worse, the debate's on at 9:30 in the morning on Saturday. So, and I think tickets go on sale tomorrow, but it will be live cast.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'll be sure to promote that, absolutely. I'm curious, what kind of support or not support have you gotten from other academics? It sounds like the University of Toronto is not really on board what you're doing, but what about from academics?
Oh, none.
Nothing.
None to speak of. Now, the Society for Academic Freedom in Halifax came out and supported me. And they're a decent organization, although they don't really have any teeth. But that's not their fault. I mean, they're doing their best. But the silence from my faculty colleagues, apart from the 200 who wrote a letter denouncing me, and didn't have enough courage to mention that it was actually me they were denouncing, even though when they sent the letter to the Varsity, which is the University of Toronto newspaper, they said it was about me, which I thought was really funny.
Wait, so when they write a letter about you,
yeah,
how many of them do you think actually believe the content of what they're saying? Like really believe that you should be silenced, versus that the inmates are sort of running the asylum at colleges now, and these other professors are really just protecting their own ass because they don't want the mob to come after them.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that's any better, by the way, of course.
I wouldn't. No. I wouldn't say that the people who denounced me did it to protect themselves, although there would have been an element of that. But certainly many of the people who are remaining silent are doing that to protect themselves. I mean, I had a colleague tell me, it was actually one of the reasons I made the video. I had a colleague say, who's been on the receiving end of some political correctness. He said, well, I won't do anything about it because the cost to me would be near infinite and the social consequences would be zero. But that's always how these situations work out, and that's why people remain silent. And remaining silent is the worst thing. That you abdicate your privileges as a citizen when you remain silent. You no longer deserve to partake of the freedoms of a citizen. But people will give up their right to. They'll give up the rights at the drop of a hat. And the silence from my faculty colleagues has been absolutely deafening.
Yeah, and it's very. Go ahead.
Well, it's no different than. I mean, I don't like to make this comparison, but there was no courage on the part of the intellectuals when the Soviets started to dismantle universities. There was no courage among the academics when the Nazis started to do the same thing in the 1930s. And it's the same process. I mean, I'm not trying to draw a direct equivalent, but it's the same process. It requires almost no pressure to intimidate people into silence. But that's because people aren't afraid enough. People have been asking me how I can tolerate the stress. It's like, first of all, compared to real stress, a sick child, that's stressful. This is a political argument. What's on the line is my job. Like, that's not a tragedy. It sucks and it's stressful, but I mean, compared to genuine stress, it's nothing. But compared to the stress that I would be under if I agreed to use this language. See, for me, the real issue for me personally is that I believe that these made-up gender-neutral pronouns are part of the radical dialectic of the PC authoritarian left. I think they're carefully crafted terms. I think they have intent behind them, and they're part and parcel of an ideology. And I dread and despise that ideology to the bottom of my soul. And there's not a chance I'm going to use those words because I would literally destroy my integrity. And I'm not doing that. I'd rather, I can't think of anything that would be worse for me than that. It would break me.
Yeah, and look, I love that passion, and it's so obvious how personal this is to you. I'm curious, what do you think is it about you that is willing to put this? I get what you're saying; it would hurt you to your core, but I just mean, like, what about your maybe formative years or something that you're the one that's putting yourself on the line for this? And I know there are a couple other, there's my friend Gad Sad, who I know you've talked to, who's in academia in Canada. Who talked about this stuff, and I know I have a few allies in the United States really protecting free speech, and they're growing, by the way, which is why so many people wanted me to talk to you. But what do you think really is it about you that makes you say, I will put my ass on the line for this?
Well, I published a book in 1999 called Maps of Meaning, and the course lectures about that are on my video channel. And I wrote Maps of Meaning because I was absolutely obsessed with what had happened in Nazi Germany and in the Soviet Union. And I mean, I really, truly mean obsessed. I spent virtually every waking second for 15 years thinking about nothing else than that, and read very, very, very widely. I read all of Carl Jung. I read Orwell and Huxley and Solzhenitsyn and a slew of books on neurobiology and all the great clinical psychologists and a huge chunk of political economy. And I read a very, very vast amount of psychological and political literature. And I synthesized this over the course of 15,000 hours. That's how long it took me to write that book. And the reason I did it was because I was trying to understand the relationship between belief and emotion and motivation. And more specifically, I'll tell you a story. Here's what I was trying to understand, all right? So one of the tricks that the guards used to pull in Auschwitz was that when the prisoners or the detainees were dumped off the rail cars where they'd been packed in like sheep, worse than sheep, and where many of them died of suffocation and dehydration and overheating, when they were dumped off at the camp, and they were ruined by then already because they'd been ripped away from their families and had their lives destroyed. But that wasn't good enough for the Auschwitz guards. And one of the tricks they used to pull on them was they'd have the inmates pick up a 100-pound sack of wet salt and carry it from one side of the compound to the other. and then back. And so it said on the Auschwitz gates, "Work will make you free," which was a joke, a black joke, a joke from the depths of hell, that like mutual assured destruction, the same kind of humor. And I was very interested in, I thought, okay, an Auschwitz guard could take someone who was already ruined, who lost their family, was suffering dreadfully, and then make them do something effortful and terrible. Because these camps were big. To carry the sack of salt from one side, that's a city. These were cities. These weren't like little prisons. And it was to demonstrate to the person their absolute abject humiliation and to deprive them of any sense of accomplishment whatsoever that they might extract from their labor. Okay, so I was interested in that, but I was interested in why a human being would do that to another human being. But I was interested in that in a very particular way, because you see, the people in Auschwitz who were the guards, they were ordinary people. And that meant that ordinary people can do that. And that meant I could do it. And so I wanted to figure out just exactly what that meant. And so I did figure out what that meant. You know, Jung said that the human shadow stretches all the way down to hell. And that's exactly right. It's really directly true. And so I realized that when I was writing Maps of Meaning, after some experiences I had also visited is more the accurate term, but I worked for this strange psychologist in Edmonton who was the prison psychologist at the Edmonton Maximum Security Prison. And I went out there a few times and observed the convicts and started thinking about what motivated them too. And, you know, I had a revelation not long after that about atrocity. And the revelation was, because I didn't think I was capable of doing such a thing, but I thought about it a long time and I realized I was bloody fully capable of it. And so then I started to puzzle out, given the human capacity to do that, and maybe even to revel in it, maybe even to enjoy it, what can possibly be done? And you know, people often perform that sort of atrocity under the guise of ideological commitment. Well, I'm persecuting the Jews because I'm actually a really good guy. Here's what I want. Here's my good intentions.
Right.
You know, here's my good intentions, and they just happen to be collateral damage. And so it's actually moral and ethical that I'm doing this. But really, they're just taking the opportunity to act out their deep hatred of being and hatred of reality and contempt for humanity. Well, I wrote Maps of Meaning in an attempt to understand that motivation and to determine what people could do so that if the opportunity arose once again, each individual would not choose to be an Auschwitz camp guard.
So what do you think, and I would welcome everyone, we'll put the link to it.
Yeah.
But what do you think is the best way to extricate yourself from that type of thinking? What's the best way to insulate yourself so that when the day comes and you are faced with some horrific choice, that you don't jump in with the collective? And, you know, the Nazi guards, of course, the phrase that they always said was, well, I was just following orders, but orders allowed them to do, you know, absolutely horrific things. So what can we all do to make sure that as the choices come to us, whatever they may be, that we don't do the horrible thing?
Well, a lot of people have thought through this. You know, Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, he came to a particular conclusion, and so did Dostoevsky, so did Alexander Solzhenitsyn, so did Václav Havel, who was the dissident, Czech dissident, who eventually became president. They all said the same thing. Those systems exist because people lie. And the way you fight them is you don't lie. You don't lie about anything ever. And so that's what you do. And you think, well, how can that make a difference? Well, Solzhenitsyn wrote the Gulag Archipelago in the 1970s, and he detailed the transformation of the Marxist philosophical doctrine into the murderous legislation that killed perhaps 50 million people in the Soviet Union between 1919 and 1959. Said the entire society was pervaded by lies. Well, 1/3 of the people were government informers. You could never say anything that you believe to be true. And it starts by people, it doesn't start by people directly lying. It starts by people muffling themselves because there are certain things you can no longer say. Mm-hmm. And you demolish your character, you weaken your character but through sins of omission. And you get weak. And as soon as you're weak, people can manipulate you right now. And so the way you fight back against totalitarianism is that you tell the truth and you act out the truth, your truth, you know, and you subject yourself to correction from other people, because the truth is a process, right? It's a process of successive approximation. And that's far more powerful than anything else you can do.
You know, it's interesting. I'm curious. Do you think people, the average person, is actually starving for truth? Really, I don't mean like human truth of the origins of the universe, although many of us are, but I mean just simple truths about how our politicians operate, how our lives operate, our day-to-day truths. Because I find all the time people will email me and say, you know, it's so great what you're doing and free speech and all this stuff. And my response to everybody is, I don't think I'm doing anything that great other than telling the truth the way I see it. I'm trying to use logic and reason to talk to people I find interesting, to learn and expand my knowledge. And that's my quest for truth. And I think people have been so dumbed down that they're almost afraid of finding it because the system has just rewarded idiocy in a way.
Yeah, well, people, you know, it says in the New Testament that man does not live by bread alone. And that's a technical commentary on the utility of the truth. The truth is, you could say, spiritual food. And I use that metaphor purposefully. You live on information. You're a cognitive apparatus. You live on information, and in information you transform